All right. So that's beautiful. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this fireside chat of the series Conscious Leaders, Conscious AI. It's a series dedicated to those who strive to be an AI-ready leader. AI is already changing how organizations are led and who gets to shape those decisions. Now, most leaders are aware of this, but far fewer feel ready for it. And this conversation today will not resolve everything, but I hope it will help sharpen our thinking and leave us with the right questions to keep asking further. I am Albana Vrioni, the Executive Director of Women on Boards Albania. And today I have the honor to address this topic with Jenny Garrett OBE. Jenny is a leadership expert, an executive coach, and MIT AI strategy alumna, and the co-author of the forthcoming book, AI for Equity. Delighted to have you with us, Jenny.
Oh, thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm very excited about our conversation.
Absolutely. Jenny, before I hand you the floor, I wanted to set the stage with something our research surfaced just yesterday in preparation for this conversation, and that we had an opportunity to also exchange earlier. We looked at what major governance surveys from well-known reputed organizations like PwC, EY, NACD, and Diligent are picking right now from directors. And the picture is striking. 55% of directors privately believe that a peer colleague should be replaced. 85% believe that speaking out on sensitive issues is more dangerous than staying silent. Boards are also publicly saying that they are AI ready, they're strategy focused, they're equity aware. So privately, however, they are grappling with something harder to name. And this is exactly why this conversation matters. You have spent 20 plus years in rooms where leaders say one thing and think another. So tell us the real version. What are you actually hearing about AI right now? Not the public version of it, but the real one. Where is the gap between what boards say and what they are privately wrestling with?
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question. And your stats really do resonate. I think that, and from my experience, what I found is that boards are moving between fear of missing out. So they're lurching and making very quick decisions because they're thinking, I'm in a race and I need to get there first, and paralysis. They're so terrified of being left behind, but they're also terrified of getting it publicly wrong. And so either they're lurching, making decisions very quickly that they haven't thought through, or they're not doing anything at all. And that public narrative is really key that you're mentioning, because quite often they say, we have an AI strategy, but what they really have is a working group and a pilot. They don't have a strategy. They haven't thought it through. They haven't got the expertise, the knowledge, or put the resources into it. So, your points are really very accurate. And I was with a peer group yesterday of very senior practitioners working in this space. And one was just describing an example of what we have. So someone who is a chief information officer in quite, a mid to large company, which has an internal large language model, they've been using it, but on the side, they are using another large language model. So the company has said, we can only use this one. We've built our own, but even a chief information officer is going outside of what should be used to get their job done. Now, they're not sharing anything confidential. They do know you shouldn't put contracts in there. You shouldn't put names in there, but they're not quite adhering to what the company is asking, and they're using systems outside. And this is the reality. Even senior people are going outside of the rules that the organizations are creating.
Right. This resonates deeply. And in the Balkans area, where a good part of my activity is right now, the institutional reform is also still fragile, and the trust in government is very hard won. This gap between public narrative and private uncertainty is something that organizations are living every day. And not just in boards, but also as a institutional culture. But the difference that I see is that in more mature markets, like the one we see typically in Europe or in the US and beyond, boards have the tools and vocabulary to manage those gaps. While in the emerging markets, the gaps can become, if I can say, structural silence. And I wonder if the solution that you would see is the same across context, or does it look different depending on how developed the governance culture is?
It's a really good question. Is it the same? I think the adoption of AI and the trust gap that's forming is actually quite universal right now, because C-suite are often driving adoption, but the others who have to implement it are terrified for their jobs. So I think that trust gap is growing, and I think a trust gap is growing in society. We have deep fakes, so we don't even know if the person we're talking to is real. And that fake can not be just a video call, it can be a voice call, for example. And so people are not trusting the implementation of AI, and they're not necessarily trusting what they see. So where do we get real, honest information from? And I think the biggest question is really, who is accountable when things go wrong? Because we can't blame the AI. I don't know if you saw that this recently, people have looked at the terms and conditions of Microsoft Copilot, and it says it's an entertainment product. Well, if it's an entertainment product, we should never be using it to make any decisions about our work life, but it's embedded in our work tools. And so actually, if it goes wrong, is it the C-suite that's responsible? Is it the middle manager who implements it? Is it the tool itself? Well, we know the tools don't want to be responsible. So I think that, number one, this trust gap that you've mentioned is a really big issue, and no one is really taking responsibility. But then, is there a one size fits all? I don't think so. If you're a small startup company, you can implement things quite quickly. You probably don't have lots of data. And so actually, you don't have to worry so much. You're building your data, and so you can build as you go. If you're a large corporate organization, you might have decades of data. You let an agent into that data, you really don't know where it's going. So many organizations, you've probably been part of teams in the past yourself, Albana, where actually you get permissions. Say you're in HR, and you're at a certain level, maybe you get permissions to look into certain records. You go to another team, and sometimes they forget to remove those permissions from you. You have access to data you probably shouldn't have anymore. So many organizations are like that. They don't know who has access to what. Then you add AI and agents in there. Who knows where that AI is going to go and what it's going to release and what it's going to have access to. So I think the challenges with a large corporate that's been growing for a long time are quite different to a small startup. And I also think there's such an opportunity for small startups to level the playing field. no, I might not be able to have 200 staff, but I can act like I
Mm.
have now with AI amplifying things. So I think the governance is really important always. But
Yeah.
I think there's a lot more to think about when it comes to access of data for corporate organizations that have a lot of data in the first place.
That's correct. That's correct. The more, let's say, business, let's say, branches, activity, years of experience that you've got in the market, the more complex is the spaghetti of data and identity and the roles of your team members, and the more thoughtful one has to be on how do we actually embrace AI. And this is a topic I find deeply personal. I have been developing keynote called Women Leading the Way to Conscious AI, precisely because I believe that how leaders relate to AI is a values question before it is a technical one, although technical aspect of it does become a lot more complex. The larger the organization, the more complex their activities. And yet, in most board conversations that I have facilitated, the conversation jumps immediately to tools and to platforms or to risk checklists, especially to risk frameworks and how they integrate and interrelate with each other. Jenny, you call these the real challenge that the boards are still missing to address. What is that challenge? Is that a governance question? Is it a leadership question? Is it both?
Yeah, I think it is definitely a leadership question and a leadership challenge.
Mhm.
And I think one of the things we're doing is we're moving so quickly that governance is having to catch up. And there isn't really a framework in place for human oversight, a real framework that we can work to. So too much is being delegated to AI, and sometimes things that should never be delegated or automated at all. So for me, absolutely, it's a leadership challenge. It's not about, absolutely, we need to give people AI literacy, tools, prompts, use cases. They are necessary, but they're not sufficient. The leadership of this is what is really important. And remembering that human oversight is key. The thing that we have to stop, I think we have to pause and take a step back and ask ourselves some questions. What are we rushing towards? Yeah. And what does the speed at which we're going mean that we missed? So there's a parable, the Good Samaritan parable story, research that was done. And what they did was they said to people, you've got an interview to get to. You've only got 5 minutes. You haven't got much time. And they told another group of people, you've got an interview to go to, but take your time. You've got all the time in the world to get there. On the journey of both groups, they had someone who'd fallen and had an accident. They had asked people about their morals and values in advance, and both would said, if situations occurred, they care about people, they have compassion, they have empathy. When they were told they didn't have time, they rushed by the person who was injured in the street. When they were told they had all the time in the world, they actually went out of their way to help the person. And that explains, I think, what's happening, that we're in such a rush that we're willing to miss some of our values, our morals, our common sense, our thoughtfulness in the process to getting to where we want, getting somewhere. We don't even know where it is currently. We don't even know where we're going, but we're rushing there. And so the point you made about leadership and values is really important. What is at the heart of the way that we want to work? What is that? What is it that we are trying to solve using AI? These are leadership questions. And also, how do I want to use AI? Do I want to use AI to make money and make my colleagues lose jobs? do I want to be more creative and create new income streams? What am I trying to do? And you may have come across the example of IKEA recently, the retail chain. Have you come across that, Albana?
Not yet. Tell me more.
It's a wonderful example. So they now use AI for their call centers to answer customer queries. And that was displacing a lot of call center staff. Now, they could have made them redundant, but what they did was they found out that interior design, there was a growing need for that in their stores. So they used AI to help train interior designers. And people like interior design to be a really personal experience. So they redeployed the call center workers to work in interior design. Now, the call center is still delivering, but now they have a new income stream in their business enabled by AI. That's how I think AI should be being used. Not how we're going to save money with people, how we're going to create more with people and AI together.
Right. How do we create value with people and AI together? And then what you say there, it looks to me like it's a character matter, it's values, character before competence. And for me, that's an important reframing for the audience that follows us. Because when we talk about board refreshment, we tend to ask, what does this person has for an AI experience or for AI knowledge? Does it have a particular well-reputed course on their CV, on their LinkedIn profile? But if you're right, the question should be, does this person have the psychological maturity and ethical imagination to set the boundaries to protect people or to identify the pathway to creating more value with people and AI? So that's an interesting reframing on how we need to refresh the boards and who needs to sit next in the boards so that we can create more value with AI and our workforce. And this is a much harder thing to assess, indeed, in a board nomination process. So this brings me to something that I find also counterintuitive, and I'd love for the audience to sit with that reflection for a moment. In governance, we are trained to ask, what should we do? What does the strategy enable us? What does the regulation require? But actually, you have flipped this around, and you've said that a leader's most important I decision is not what to use it for, but also what to never use it for. So you've written in length in your book for that, but how does a leader make that call? And what does getting that response wrong look like in practice?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I want to root this conversation in the fact that we are talking about how we can consciously engage with AI, and the fact that many people are having quite a reductive view right now, which is how much money can we save? How many people do we no longer have to employ? Which we're seeing over and over again. People have to reverse that decision when they make it. The Klarna is an example. There are many other examples of organizations that have cut staff or have said to themselves, we don't need to recruit people anymore. And they've quickly realized this isn't the case. So I start from the opposite view, which is we don't need to remove people. And I think the first thing to do is root yourself in what is human and what do you need to think about. So, to develop people, truly develop people as a leader, as a manager, there's a different kind of relationship that AI cannot replicate. AI can give you advice, give you knowledge, but it cannot sit in the room with you and really unlock your true potential, in my opinion. So I think as a strategy, you need to be rooted in that. What does it mean to be human, and what cannot be replaced? Even if Claude gives me empathy, it's not real empathy. It's what it's been trained to say, but it's not, doesn't have feelings. So I think that's the first thing we need to think about. What do we want to keep human, and what do we value about humanity? I think also recognizing decisions you should never automate. Never, ever. There are many decisions that we should never try or consider automating. You know, life or death for starters, I think. You know, we can use AI to help us in the thinking process, but the decision should be human. So I think that's something that we need to consider. And, you know, things like performance conversations, redundancy decisions, safeguarding, bereavement support, those are not inefficiencies to optimize. They are moments when you need real humans as part of it. So I think the starting point is knowing, what do I value about being human? What do I want to keep human? I think these are great questions, great thoughts for yourself. And then, and then I think there's some thoughts about how you make calls. So you asked, what about when it goes wrong? You know, could I explain to the person affected why a machine got this wrong? Yeah. If the answer is no, then there's a problem, because it should be explainable. The process should be explainable, and it should be clear. And if we don't know ourselves, then there's an issue. I think the second one to be thinking about is, does this process require contextual judgment? And increasingly, when I use AI, it is that question. You're missing the context. So you're giving me this information, but it's not the right answer, because there are things that you don't know. AI has data. It doesn't have wisdom. That's what humans have. And from the preview you've had of my book, there's the U in my model, which stands for understand what you are automating. So before you automate anything, you have to ask, who designed this process and whose interest does it serve? You know, you talked about your amazing keynote, which has a focus on women. Does, you know, whose interest does this serve? Does the thing I'm automating serve women, serve men, serve other groups? Whose interest does it serve? We need to understand that.
Absolutely. So understanding what we value about human, what we want to honor and to take care of, and what then looking at what is it that we want to increase as efficiencies. And then, of course, just to be also honest, it is for a board, it is much easier to pass a motion than to hold the line, because approving an AI investment that comes with a business case, with a budget, with KPIs, all clear, it is sometimes much easier than to really pose those uncomfortable questions and deciding what AI must never be allowed to do, and or what is it that we value the most about our business, about our organization, about our community. And it seems to me that answering to this kind of question, it requires a different kind of board conversations. It requires conversations that go slower, that are value-led conversations, and that often are uncomfortable conversations. And I'm curious about the audience that is here with us, and I would invite you maybe to log in the chat box. When did you had your last conversation of that kind, a conversation that was more about what AI must not be allowed to do, rather than what AI should be able to do? Just prompt in the chat, and I'd be able to. I'd love to read later on what your input is there. But this is leading me to the next part of our conversation. It's part of the conversation that I have been most looking forward to, because it speaks directly to the core of why many of us are in this room today. You know, at Women on Boards Albania, equity is not an abstract principle. It is what happens when a qualified woman is passed over for a board seat because the system was not designed with her in mind. It is what happens when governance reform is rolled out through institutions that were built on exclusion. And now what we see is that AI is accelerating the speed at which those same systems are operating or will be operating, with or without our oversight. Now, Jenny, your book and podcast are called AI for Equity. And you're talking in this fireside chat to an audience of aspiring or confirmed board members and leaders and governance professionals. Why does equity belong on the AI agenda and not just on the ethical agenda? And if I can add one more, what is the institutional risk of leaving this conversation for too late?
Thank you. Thank you. Great questions. So ethics is a conversation about values for me. You know, it's about the values of the organizations, the values that you want to uphold. Now, equity is a conversation about risk, about liability, and long-term institutional stability. And I think that belongs on every board agenda. If your AI systems are trained on historical data, they are encoding historical inequity. Yeah. So if you're using AI to sift for a particular role that men have always had, we know that actually it's going to be innately biased against women because it's looking at what's been done before. But this is not just a moral problem, which people often think when they think about equity. It's a legal and reputational problem because it exposes you to things that you have not yet measured. And in terms of the EU, the AI Act, which should be coming into play in summer of this year, and evolving UK employment law are moving from a nice to have to audit ready. So this is essential, in my opinion, equity, to be considering it. If you want to, as a board member, be thinking about your risk, your liability, and your long-term sustainability, it is essential. I just want to give an example about what I'm talking about here, because I think that when we think about equity, we think maybe we're thinking about people's protected characteristics, gender, race and ethnicity, for example. But there are many different ways to look at this. So according to the research, the more senior you are in an organization, the more likely you are to have AI training. But people who are frontline workers, deskless workers, less senior staff often have to learn AI for themselves. So they are being left behind. And at the pace AI amplifies, that gap is widening. So we can think about AI, we can think about equity within the data, but we can also think about equity in terms of who gets AI training and who doesn't. And another way to consider equity in this whole process is to remember that a lot of the roles that are now being automated are typically roles that women fill. At administrative roles, part-time roles, supporting service roles. They're often women's roles. So women could be quite displaced by the implementation of AI. So we can look at equity more broadly at that strategic level around risk and us making decisions based on old data. But we can also think about the decisions we're making now and the impact they're going to have. If you don't have women in your pipeline of people coming through because you've removed that bottom tier, then you're going to have less diversity in your organization. And as a result, you might miss something. You might miss understanding your clients, your customers, the people that you serve. You might miss a perspective that's key to the growth of your business as well.
Lovely. Absolutely. Now, I don't want to talk about your book. I want to leave to keep the suspense for the reader, but I want to take just a little quote from the book when you say, equity is no longer an issue of ethics. It is an issue of economics. And there you explain beautifully why is that becoming an issue of economics. And what has grabbed my attention recently is also a statistic that at the current pace, women will reach boardroom parity by 2034, which is, by coincidence, the same year AI is projected to automate the vast majority of corporate decisions. Now, this means that most organizations will have deployed advanced AI governance systems while still being governed primarily by men. And Jenny, is that the reason that you're trying to name, that we will have institutionalized bias at machine speed before the governance reform catches up?
Absolutely. You've put the nail on the head, as they say. Yeah, completely. This is, if we go at the pace that we're trying to go at, we are accelerating and amplifying bias at scale. It already exists. It's only a mirror of us. And we know bias exists in society. We know women are in that pipeline, but we hit that glass ceiling and we don't get through. And it will just amplify that. And it can be very inadvertent. It's not always direct. It's not so clear always that the bias is in the system. And that's why I encourage a slowing down, a pausing, a thoughtfulness and understanding. So there's an example of Google Ads, where an organization was trying to recruit, I think it was trying to recruit nurses. And it automatically went to another group who were not, they said they didn't want to recruit men or women, they just wanted to recruit nurses. But because of the group that they went towards, they were mostly women. So women then responded to the nursing advert. It was only being directed at women. So the groups that get chosen, you might say, I want men and women to apply for the nurses, this nursing role. And you put that into Google Ads, but who Google Ads goes to get that data becomes only women, and perpetuates that bias. And this is the challenge, that we have to work through that. And if we just accelerate it at scale, we are just going to amplify what we currently do in society at scale. And I think we can talk about women. We can also talk about the fact that the data, I mean, people often, talk about the fact that it's often white men who created these systems, and the data is majority group, global north. We also can think about the global south, the fact that actually people will be working with data that doesn't even relate to them, and using AI in different parts of the world. And how could that disadvantage them? What might it be thinking? So yeah, I don't want to get into all the topics of the book, but this is it. This is the crux of the problem.
Absolutely, absolutely. I want to shift though from the structural to the more personal for a moment, because I think that the audience is full of people who are quietly asking themselves, what do I actually do with all of this? Now, you work with leaders in very different contexts, across sectors, across countries. From what you have observed, what do the leaders who are navigating this well have in common? What are they doing differently?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I must say, I really enjoy talking to people about AI, because this is an ongoing conversation. I loved how you said earlier, boardroom conversations. You said, you didn't say it's one conversation.
Yeah.
This is not something you can have one conversation about and then we don't have to talk about it for another year. This is an ongoing conversation because it's evolving and new things happen and you have to keep thinking. But I think a common thread that comes through is that they have separated what AI can do from what we will use it for. So AI could do almost everything if we really wanted it to, but they're thinking about what do we want to use it for? And I think that is really important. And they're going beyond large language models to think, what does my do we create something using AI? What does that actually look like? So it's not just we're rolling out Copilot. It's what is the best use of AI for us?
Yeah. What we want to use it for, and what is it that we do not want to use it for,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
The second question is that they have done exactly what we've already been talking about, that this is a values conversation, not just a technology one. So they're not putting it in, as I think people did initially, this is IT, this is tech. They've realized that this is a values organizational question. And the ideal is to bring them, the senior people from your technology team with the strategists, with the CEO, to bring those people together to have the conversation. I think the other, there's a couple of other things. They've invested in psychological safety around AI. So people can say, I don't get it, without being penalized, because, there's a lot of fear around this. And that, therefore, what happens when there's a lot of fear is people don't challenge and they don't say the obvious thing, or they don't say this isn't going to work. And that's why they just go along with it. And I think that investment in, let me know if you don't think this is the right thing to do. Let me know what the questions, the queries are, and your job is safe. It might not be safe forever because the economy changes, etc. But we're not planning to replace you with AI. That conversation is not being had as well. So I think if they have that conversation, I think that's that. When we hear we've discussed the psychological safety, we've told people how we are going to use it, we are welcoming people's perspectives on AI, that is really brilliant. And of course, the most important thing that you've been talking about, they've moved from piloting to governance. So not just running experiments, but building decision making for how AI gets adopted. They're really getting to that point, as in what's our working governance process for whether we go with this or whether we don't, really starting to move that thinking through.
Lovely, lovely. So it's not just being knowledgeable about AI at the leadership level or throughout the organization, which is a must anyway, but also creating that safety, psychological safety to pose questions for those who don't get it, but also for the leadership team, right?
Yes.
To own that uncertainty, because when a leader can say, I don't get it, then it's easier also for those down the line in the organization to also pose questions and to feel safer into questioning what is being done or not being done on the way AI is being adopted. That's beautiful. Although I must say that in my experience, facilitating governance conversations, especially in the area of Balkans, that kind of epistemic humility is, I would say, it's rare, but it's also in itself a governance innovation. So encouraging that, developing that is a supporting system in itself into moving from piloting into governing AI.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think the behaviors around it are that, I talked about what I see going well, but I think there are specific behaviors as well that need to be in place in order to do this. So completely agree with you. And the first step might be nurturing those behaviors before you move to the next step.
Exactly. Now, I want to give you a moment to leave something with this audience, because I believe that everyone here will walk out with one thing in their pocket if we do that right. And so, if you could put one question on the agenda of every board for whom we've got representatives here, we've got leaders, we've got aspiring leaders, aspiring board members, that they can take with them, with their leads, with their boards over the next 6 months. What would that question be?
Yes, yeah. I mean, as we've been talking, I've thought about lots of questions. So I always find it hard to give just one. I might give you more than one.
Yeah,
And
and I know that in your book there are plenty of them,
yes.
but I just want you to pick one of them that you want to leave this audience with.
It's so hard. It's so hard. I think, my initial question in my mind is, are the people most affected by AI in your organization in the room when decisions are made about it? So are those people in the room when the decisions about it are being made? Yeah. So I think there's something about, and they might not be in the boardroom, of course, but are we taking other people's perspectives into consideration? Because the quick decisions that are being made and having to roll back on, I don't think they would have been made if they had the right people in the room in the first place. Right. Yeah. So I will have that as one question, but I've got lots of others.
Oh, beautiful. And I could also flip that a little bit around and say, who is not in the room when a certain decision is being made, and what is the cost of their absence?
Yes, that's nice. Yeah, what's the cost of their absence? Absolutely.
Yeah. So, and I believe that just with that question alone, applied to AI governance, we might change more boards' agendas than any framework or regulation could in the longer term. So, Jenny, this conversation, we are coming slowly to the end of it, has done what best fireside chats should do. It has made us more curious, not less. There are so many questions that you say that we could integrate on our reflection in our board conversations, in our team conversations. So you have helped us see what AI is, that the AI is in fact not a technology problem waiting for a technical solution, but it's a leadership question. Question for leaders who are willing to ask harder questions, to hold clear lines, and have value-centered, equity-centered decision making. Now, your book, AI for Equity, which I had the honor to pre-read, it is co-authored with your daughter, Leah, even more interesting, is coming from Emerald Publishing in September 2026. And to me, it feels like it is the right conversation or the right intervention at exactly the right moment. The fact that it's also an intergenerational conversation between you and your daughter, it says to me something profound about what conscious AI leadership actually looks like. It means building something that we would be willing to hand to the next generation. Dear listeners, do follow Jenny's work. Find her on LinkedIn as Jenny Garrett OBE. Do subscribe to the AI for Equity podcast, co-hosted with her daughter Leah, and do visit jennygarrett.global. And I definitely encourage you to continue this conversation. Continue that with each other, with your boards, with other people in your organization, and anyone who needs to work on this matter. For now, thank you for participating, and Jenny, thank you so much for being with us. It has been a pleasure and an honor.
The honor's been mine. Thank you.
Thank you. Till next.